In this section, we will learn how to use Rust macros. What is a macro? Macro, in essence, is a code that creates new code. So basically, if we look at our implementation, we will see a lot of kind of duplication. And we want to create some way to generate this code automatically without repeating ourselves. So there are many ways when you develop software to avoid code duplication. And macro is a very powerful tool to use to avoid code duplication. So imagine in our case, what are the examples or what are the usages of macro that can be interesting for us? So for example, every palette has functions like this one, like create claim, revoke claim. We want to map these functions to extrinsic calls. In this example, create claim, revoke claim. For every function that we want to expose, we have a specific call. And this is code repetition because the name of this call is basically the name of the function, and the same goes for the balances palette because we have the same structure. So we have the transfer call and we have the transfer function, so the name is the same. And also the dispatch implementation is basically the same for all palettes. We always have to match which call we have and then route it to transfer. So these are all codes that could be automatically be generated. And also, not only that, but in some way, we could have a way to add a new palette to our runtime without writing all this code like this one and adding the configuration and adding the runtime calls in this list. So in the next sessions, we will learn how to use macros to reduce our code and make it more powerful. But for now, let's just start creating the macro folder. These macros are already written, so we don't need to understand right now how to create new macros. At this moment, we will only use these macros, and little by little, we will understand what's inside the macro code. So for that, we already have a directory where you can download the macros that we have them ready for you, ready for usage. So click in this link and then you're gonna have like a macros folder, create a macros file. So I'm downloading it and then I'm going to unzip it. And then this is the macros folder. And if you look inside, there's a cargo toml and there are other sources that we are going to see very soon. But for now, I'm going to import these macros into my code environment. So in this case, I just drag and drop, copy the folder, and then we have the macros here. So if you look at them, you're gonna see two folders, the call and the runtime. So basically there are two macros that we are going to use in the next lessons. The first one is related to everything inside the palette that can be automatically generated by the enum, the dispatch, and everything related to the calls inside the palettes. And then later, the macros that we're going to use in our runtime. And every macro has basically three files that are the macro code. You don't need to understand it right now. We are going to explain it later. But basically, macros are code templates. If you take a look at this, you see that somehow, this is the code that is going to be automatically generated when you expand the macro. The macro will just write code, and basically we already used some macros. So for example, remember that we use derive code, derive debug here. Basically what is happening is that this macro here is just adding some code at this point. And the way it works is that when you add a macro, the macro will analyze the code environment, the context. For example, this macro is just under here, so it will look at this code and see how can I look at this code, extract some information about it, and this is done by the parse file. So the parse will read this code, understand what we have here, recognize some patterns or some variables or some information, and then we use this information to generate more code based on this structure. So right now I just added the macros folder, and then I need to import it into my project. So I will just add this to my cargo toml, and if I did not do anything wrong, I can just run, and it's compiling and everything is correct. If I just to make sure it's not working, if I do something wrong, so basically the macro is perfectly being compiled. So if I change something like this and try to compile a wrong file, it won't work because the macro itself is not well written. Okay, so in the next lesson we will dive into the macro, the first macro usage, the macro called call.